Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And thank you again for joining this Nexmo live coding session. My name is Glenn Canena. I'm the editor-in-chief at Nexmo, the Vonage API platform, and I'll be your moderator today. In today's live coding session will be a walkthrough of building an inbound call tracking app using the Nexmo Voice API, and your presenter will be Aaron Bassett. So let me just give you a quick introduction into Aaron, and then we can jump right into the code. So Aaron is a developer advocate who actually just recently joined Nexmo. Previously, he was a senior software engineer. He's a frequent conference speaker. He's got more than 15 years of agency and product experience, and he's been kind enough to give you fair warning that he does talk with a weird Irish Scot accent. So during the presentation, as Aaron is walking through his coding, please feel free to ask any questions that may come up in the GoToWebinar app. Just put your questions in there. We'll compile them during the presentation, and at the end, we'll answer as many of them as we can. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Hey everybody, thanks for that intro, Glenn. So as Glenn said, I'm going to be taking you through today building a call tracking system using kind of Nexmo Voice API and our webhooks. So some of the things we're going to look at, I'll do a quick introduction about what we're going to build first. Just kind of a run through so you kind of know what our objectives are here. Then I'll talk about some of the tools and libraries that we'll use to do the actual development. Then we'll do a bit of live coding where you can watch me actually build out the app itself. And then finally we'll have a demonstration looking at the kind of information that we have managed to track on each call and having a look at some of the graphs and some of the data that we're able to kind of interrogate and the information that we can pull from that. So first things first is look at some of the kind of introduction about what we're going to build. So like everybody in the developer relations team at Nexmo, as Glenn said, I started off as a software engineer. So whenever Glenn approached me about doing this webinar and about building the call tracking software, much as I do for any of our projects or any of our articles, the first thing I did was approach it like I would any kind of software project. So I put together a list of some of the requirements that I thought we may have. What campaign is somebody calling about? When did the call take place? What was the duration of the call? What kind of metadata do we want to record about it? So I scribbled kind of some notes about it first. Did like usual kind of mind mapping and things, looking at so how do we track which campaign it is? So when you think about tracking campaigns, and if you're tracking kind of a campaign online, whether it be a Facebook ad campaign or some Google adverts or any kind of click tracking or CPA, CPR kind of campaign, it's all the tooling is kind of already there for you. There's so much of the web has been built around kind of advertising that we have fantastic tools already for tracking clicks. But if we want to track from the analog into the digital, so we want to track if somebody has visited our website via a magazine advert that they've seen, or via a radio advert that they've heard, the only way we can tell which channels are performing best for us is by having some form of unique URL or coupon code. Something where the user has to enter to show where it was that they came from. So normally that might be done by having some kind of like promotional path in the end of the end of our domain, or by giving them a coupon code where they get a discount when they subscribe, and that coupon code would be unique to the advertisement that we've placed. So we need something as easy as that, but for when people call. So that's why I've kind of looking at inbound virtual numbers. They're really easy to set up. They're very much like setting up a URL. It's very, very simple to do. So we've got the inbound virtual number. We can see which campaign they're calling about, so we know where to route it to. We can record the calls. We need to really kind of tell them about that. And then once they have actually called and we can see where they're calling and routed them to the right place, then we can kind of look at the stuff that we want to track. So who are they? How often do they call? Now, for the marketing, you're going to be hoping that you're going to close that on the first call, so that might not be a huge metric to track. But you don't. It's not just marketing campaigns that you can track here. You could use it for tracking your support queries. So then how often could become a really valuable metric. Do you have a high support volume of kind of repeat calls that aren't getting answered on the first time? Do people call on different campaigns? Have they called multiple times across? Maybe they've called about a marketing campaign and they've called your support line, or maybe they've called your sales line, etc. And what is the cost of acquisition for that user? How much are we spending speaking to them on the phone, etc., in order to provide that support, or to actually to get them to register or to get them to purchase? And then we can track some information about the actual kind of call itself. Which campaign did they phone? What was the duration of the call? Was it really quick, or were they really engaged around the phone for a very long time? Who was it that called? So it goes back to kind of our user meta information. And then the outcomes. So we have all this data about users generally online. If they register on our website, we may have them fill in kind of their name and their email address, maybe gender, or we might be able to, based upon our kind of profiling, tell more information about them. But whenever they call and then maybe we don't close them on that telephone call itself and they go away and then they register on the website later, it kind of breaks that ability to track from one medium to the next. So we can't really track our outcomes very easily. But what we can do is we can look at, say, well, we know what telephone number they phoned from, and hopefully that will be their main number, their primary number, which they will also use whenever they register on the site. So we can then start to pull this information together and to track, not just the data we have about the call, but then link that data from the call to any other actions they perform, whether that may be a site registration or a purchase or a subscription or whatever it is. And then we can also, that feeds into the cost. So what was our CPA, etc. again. And once we know our outcomes and we know, how much revenue we're generating from that user, then we can kind of look to see if our acquisition cost was reasonable. So that's kind of the mind map that I put together after my notes. And then once I kind of got that brain dump there, then I started looking at, kind of sequence diagrams to try and get the application flow. Now, this is quite a complex one. It's quite long. So I'm just going to zoom in on it a little bit here and just look at kind of a section at a time. So the first thing we really need to deal with is this top section, which is answering the call. So a user makes a telephone call to one of the Nexmo virtual numbers. And the first thing that Nexmo does is it requests this NCCO. Now, an NCCO is a Nexmo call control object. Essentially, it's a JSON file which contains an array, and that array is a list of objects. And each object is an action that we want Nexmo to perform. So actions can be a range of different things. It might be we want to record a call, or we want to receive some input. So by input, I mean like kind of IVR systems, interactive voice response systems. You may encounter these if you phone a customer support, and it asks you to press 1 for different departments, or to press 2 to speak to an agent, or to press 3 to check your bill, etc. That's an IVR system. So we have actions for that to capture input. We have actions to connect different calls together, etc. So the first thing we're going to do whenever somebody phones this number is to find out what actions do we want to perform, and that's where this NCCO comes in. So Nexmo asks our application, what action is it that we want to perform? We send back a list of actions, and in this instant, the first thing we're going to want to do is to stream a message to the user. So we want to play an MP3 file to the user, thanking them for calling our number and letting them know that the call may be recorded. So let's kind of make a start on some of the code for this then. We're going to build out this example today in Python with Flask. That's just because it's one of the languages I'm very familiar with. It doesn't mean that that's what you have to use yourself. If we have a look at the Nexmo developer, which is on just developer.nexmo.com, under kind of SDKs and tools, you can see we have client libraries for kind of most of the main languages. You know, we have a Ruby library, we have a Node, we've got .NET, we've got Java, you know, PHP, etc. We also have a Go library, which is kind of an unofficial one at the moment. You know, there's essentially we have kind of the 6 official Nexmo client libraries at the moment. There are libraries for other languages as well. They may not be officially supported. They may not have the same amount of coverage of the API as these ones do. You know, but really, it's a simple REST API. If your language can make a HTTP request, then you can interact with the Nexmo API. But the easiest way to do it in certain languages is by using our client libraries, which are on developer.nexmo.com. So today we're going to be using the Python client library. And we're going to be using that with Flask just to build a really simple kind of web application that can serve up our JSON files for our call control objects, and then also can handle the webhooks that are going to come back from Nexmo to kind of deal with the different status of the call. You know, to let us know whenever the call is completed and the duration of the call, etc. So let's make a start. So first thing we're going to do is just create a new project. Let's just make a directory, live coding. And let's create a new virtual environment. So I actually want to use, let's use a more recent version of Python. So we're going to go, let's do 3.6.2. Let's just get the binary for that. And we're going to create our virtual environment. So make virtual, and the Python version we want is that one we just got there now. We're just going to call our virtual and live coding. Oh, of course. Okay, so that's good enough. It's going to install our virtual environment for us. Once that's complete, we need to install a few different libraries. Alexa's trying to help me here. So first thing we need to do is just install our different libraries. We're going to do a pip install. We're going to need Nexmo, obviously. We're going to need Mixpanel as well, because that's where we're going to be storing our data. We're going to need Flask, because that's what we're going to be using to build our web application. I'm not going to do like a full ORM or a full database or anything like that. So what we're going to use is just a little application called TinyDB, which, as it sounds, is a tiny database, kind of normally used for embedded systems. It just works on a JSON file. For this small example, it will do perfect. So we have all our dependencies installed. If we have a look here, we should see different ones. That's great. So we can see that Flask is installed, and we have Nexmo, and we have Mixpanel, etc. Perfect. So we're ready to kind of get going here. So let's call it app.py, and let's just open up our editor. Okay, so we're going to open up this live coding, and let's open our app.py. Let's make this a bit bigger for everybody here. Okay, so there's a couple of imports we're going to need straight away. So we're going to import OS because both Mixpanel and Nexmo require API keys and API secrets. I obviously do not want to store those API keys or secrets in my code. I really don't want to broadcast my Nexmo API keys and secrets during a public webinar live demo. So I've already stored them in environment variables that we can kind of retrieve later on. So I'm going to import OS so we can use os.environ later to get those. So we've got our OS. We're going to need a few things from Flask. So we're going to go from Flask, and what we're going to do, we're going to need Flask itself. We're going to need the request object, and we're going to need JSONify. So JSONify is kind of like a shortcut to sending or to rendering a response as JSON, which is what we're going to do whenever we're sending back our NCCO, because that's just a JSON file. We're going to need our tinydb as well, so let's do tinydb, and we're going to need to import tinydb itself and query so we can query it. We're going to need Nexmo. We're going to need Mixpanel. It's actually a capital M for there. In the module. Oh yeah, and we're going to need the Python JSON library as well. So whenever you create a voice application in Nexmo, you can pick, kind of, it sends post, it sends get, etc. For ours, it's going to send us a post request, and part of that post request is actually going to be a JSON request that we're going to need to turn back into a Python object. So that's why we're importing the Python JSON library, because I know later on, whenever we receive our webhook from Nexmo, it's going to come to us as a JSON string. So that's everything imported. Let's set up our Flask app. So it's just like, and let's set up our DB. Now I'm using this tinydb. As I said, it's just like an embedded kind of one. Obviously, if you're doing this for real, you'd probably want to have, whether it be an ORM like SQL Alchemy, or doing it with Django and using your ORM, etc. For this small example, I don't want to get kind of hooked on, loading up models or doing migrations, etc. So we're just going to use this tinydb. It's powered by a JSON file. It'll be really easy. And then we're going to create our first route. So the first one we're going to do, looking at our sequence diagram, is this answer. So we need to be to serve up a NCCO. So let's just call it answer, and we're going to just serve it from. So route. Answer. And we're going to need to know which campaign it is we're calling about. So depending upon the campaign, we'll want to send like maybe a different welcome message. So it may be a case that we have multiple campaigns running at the same time, and they could be for different products, or they could be from different brands. We don't want to have multiple versions of our app running. We just want a single app that can handle multiple campaigns, can route them to the correct agents, and can store the details about them in Mixpanel or whatever business intelligence tools we're using. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to find a way to differentiate which campaign it is they're calling, and we're going to do that based upon the telephone number that they're dialing. So we're going to get the number that they're calling. Whenever Nexmo requests our NCCO, it's going to do it as a GET request, and it's going to pass along a parameter of 2. So that's what we're going to use to identify which campaign is where the person's called, is by looking at the number that they dialed. So we have the campaign, or we have the number that we dialed. Now we need to kind of look that campaign up. So we may reuse this. So let's just create a function called get campaign. Let's pass in that number 2. Obviously, if we're doing this like for a much bigger project, we might, have our models, or might have a model manager or some methods on that. So these lookups. For this, we're just going to create a quick function. We'll create our query object, our queasy object, and then we're going to just do campaigns. We're going to do a search on our DB for a campaign where the inbound number equals the number the user dialed. Okay, so that most of the time that's going to be fine. With ours though, we're actually going to be redirecting the user to a different number. You know, we may have multiple different agents, or we may have multiple different call centers, etc. They might be operating on different numbers. So whenever the person phones, we're going to, let's say, play our message back, start the recording, and then forward them on to the right place. At that point, then the number 2 is going to change from that original inbound number to the number we're now redirecting them to. So it could be one of 2 numbers depending upon when it is that we're actually kind of doing this campaign lookup. So we need to check for both of those. So let's just put an OR clause in here. So that's going to be our first condition. And our second one is just going to be really the same thing again with a slight modification. And this time we're going to be looking at our redirect number rather than our inbound number. You know, so we're saying, okay, do a DB search and look for wherever the inbound number or the redirect number is the number that's currently being dialed. And then we're going to return the first campaign on the list. Really, we should only have one campaign running either of those numbers. If there's any campaigns that exist, else none. So that get campaign should always just return the first campaign or none. So let's just say down here then that our campaign equals our get campaign, and we'll pass in our number 2. Okay, so we're really only interested if we have a campaign. You know, if we don't, well, there's not much we can do about it at that point. You know, we don't know who they're phoning, we don't know the reason for their call. So we're just going to, like, first of all check to make sure that the campaign exists, and then we'll you know, send our NCCO to them. But if we can't find a number for the campaign, well, we really should return something. We don't want this line to go dead. You know, it could be an old number that they found in a magazine that we no longer are actively using for a campaign. But that doesn't mean that, you know, we should just ignore these customers who are obviously engaged with our brand. You know, it could be for a product that we've maybe changed names, or we don't have the contact center set up for it anymore. We can still provide them with some information, so provide a better customer experience. So we're going to just have a quick else statement in here then. And for that then, we're just going to return our personify, which is going to return our JSON object, and our NCCOs are always an array, so let's just start out with an array. And we're only going to have one object in here. So we're going to do an action, and let's just do an action of talk. So what talk will do is it'll use a synthesized voice to play a message to the user. We can just type whatever message you want in here. So I don't know, let's, anybody in the UK, you will probably recognize this message. The number you dialed has been recognized. Okay. You know, we could have something in there asking them to press 1 to be redirected to our main switchboard, and then use some IVR to detect if what button they've pushed, and then redirect them accordingly. But for now, we're just going to read out this message to them. There's a bunch of different things in our documentation around the kind of voice API and our call control objects and what you can do. So here you can see I'm just using this talk to send a synthesized speech conversation. We could play them a different recording, or we could connect them to our switchboard. You know, really there's a lot of options there, but for this example, we're just going to read out that text to them. Now, if we do have a campaign, our call control object is going to be a little bit more advanced. Let's just create it here. And our first action is we want to play that MP3 to them. So we're going to stream an MP3 to the user. and we need to provide a stream URL, which in itself is actually a list as well. And we're just going to like give it our URL here. So we're going to use, I'm just going to copy this across rather than sit and type out the whole thing. So in this instance, we have our URL, and then we're going to tag on this message in the end, which is just the actual address of our welcome message, which is part of our campaign. So in the campaign, we have a few different bits of data. We have what the inbound number is, what the redirect number is, what the welcome message is, what the name of the campaign is, etc. So one of the things we have is welcome message, which is the location of our audio file we want to play. It's going to live in a directory within our application. So that's where our URL here of Nexmo calltracking.ngrok.io is come in. That's another thing to kind of bear in mind is with this, obviously the Nexmo API needs to be able to reach our application in order to request the NCCO file or to hit our webhooks. I'm going to be running this locally, just on my machine. I don't want to go through all the effort of setting up a domain and changing the DNS records to point at my local IP address or my local public IP address, etc. So I'm going to use ngrok to do that instead. Ngrok just creates a tunnel to localhost that you can then provide to these services. We've got a post on our blog about ngrok and about some of the benefits of it. If it's something that sounds like it might be useful to you, go have a read of that post for more details. Okay, so we're going to play our stream. So where does that put us in our little sequence diagram? So we've done our call, we're sending back our response, we're streaming a message. Okay, so that's actually our first region done. So let's just save this up and try running our Flask app. So we're still in our live coding one. We're going to go Flask run. Okay, I haven't told it what to run, so let's export that nice. We're going to go export Flask, and we just call it app.py, and let's run it in debug mode as well. So Flask debug equals 1. That'll give us some nice error reporting if we make any mistakes. So let's try running that. Okay, great. So we have our application running a local host. We can have a look at it, and we're going to get a error because I've got a little syntax error. Let's just change that up. And try refreshing again. And we can see we're getting our not recognized message because we're not providing a to in here. Now, our DB request has created this campaign.json for us. There's nothing in it at the moment. In proper Blue Peter style, here is one that I prepared earlier. So as I said, it's just a piece of JSON. You can see here I've got a test campaign. I specified an inbound number. I specified a redirect number, and I specified that welcome message, of static audio calls recorded.mp3. So let's save that in there and have a look at what was our to number. So if we select our inbound number, and let's run this again, but this time we're going to provide that query string parameter, and we never actually returned our NCCO, so let's just go return that to our view then. So we've built this NCCO object. The next thing we're going to have to do is actually return that to Flask so it renders it out. So let's just do return. We'll just use our JSONify again, so we don't have to worry about setting our headers, etc. And NCCO. Because you're running in debug mode, that should automatically restart for us, which is great. And then we can just refresh this. And we can see there is our first action. So we're saying that whenever somebody phones this number, that we want to stream this file to them. So that's our first part of our sequence diagram taken care of. So the next part is we actually want to begin recording the call. Now we've notified them that the calls might be recorded. That's really simple. So let's just add this in as part of the same NCCO. So Again, it's just going to be another object with an action. And this time our action is going to be record. Now record doesn't have a stream URL, it actually has an event URL. So let's just pop that in, and the event URL again is a list, and let's just copy our URL across for that. So we're going to put it on the same domain, and it's just going to be it record. We're not actually going to build that endpoint today. I'm just adding it in here as an example because it's something that you probably will want to do during this. It's not what we're really focusing on with the collection of the data, but just to show you that's how simple it is to actually add recording to it. So let's save that. And we can refresh again, and we now have our record action. So we've ticked off this bit. So the next thing we want to do is actually proxy the call. So here we have Nexmo is going to tell the customer to call our agent, to forward the call to the correct agent, or the correct call center, or the correct number, whoever should be handling the call for this campaign. So let's go back to our NCCO. I'm going to add this in again. So again, it's a regular action. We're going to connect two parties together. So the action is called connect. We need to tell Nexmo who to show the call is being from. So in this instance, we're actually going to use our inbound number. So the number the person's just called is a number that this is going to appear to your agent as being from. The reason for that is you have to use a Nexmo virtual number as your from number. So that's in this instance, we're going to use the inbound number the person called because we know it's a Nexmo virtual number to be listed our from number. One of the nice things that you could do with this, we have on our site a place called use cases. And one of the use cases is what's called whisper. So I think it's down near the bottom, yeah. So call whisper essentially would be where the person phones. Then we create a conference call. We invite our agent to the conference call first. So they're in the call. We can then stream some audio to them or use our text to voice to tell them information about the user before they join the call. So we can tell them which campaign they called, or if we have other information such as like their name or their location, etc., anything that might be useful to our call center agent to deal with it, we can provide that over the phone to them first. And then once we've done that, we then bring the user into that call. So they join that conference that's already been started between Nexmo and the agent. In this instance, we're just going to use the inbound number. So if they are in a call center or wherever, that number will come up, they know which campaign it is being called about. So next we're going to need to do after that, sorry, my dog was lying at my feet, nicely sleeping for most of the webinar, and just decided to give off. But yes, where is it? Yes, so we have our connect action. We're telling them which campaign that they're calling about, and then we need to tell them where to connect to. So this is where our endpoint comes in. So we have an endpoint. This is going to be another list. We need to tell what type of endpoint. In this instance, it's going to be a phone that we're going to connect to. Other types you could have is things like a WebSocket. So you can connect a voice call to a WebSocket server, which is really quite nice. It allows you to do lots of very cool things in the browser with it as well. And this is going to be a phone, and we're going to tell it which number, and that's going to be our redirect number that we talked about above. And just actually a dict. So redirect number. Okay, so we're going to save that up. Let's go. Flash should restart it for us. That's great. Back to our browser, and we have an error. So let's have a look. line 42. Campaign endpoint. Let's just try taking this out here. There we go. There we go. So we can see there we've got our stream, we've got our record, and now we've got our connect. So that takes us kind of up to kind of our proxy call. We started our call across. We'll receive this event from Nexmo telling us that the call has started. And then really, from that point on, we're more than interested on tracking whenever the call finishes. So that's really everything for this NCCO that we're going to send to Nexmo. The next part is we're going to have to wait for Nexmo to send some information to us. We're only really interested after the user's hung up, and we can start recording the information about the call. So whenever the call completes, Nexmo will call a webhook, and it provides that webhook with some data. And that data will include things like the time the call took place, the duration of the call, the cost of the call, everything really that we need to know from that. This kind of little graph, and we've got all this stuff here about the call tracking. The only thing it won't include is who called. But what we're going to do for that is we actually have another API that we're going to look at on our developer site. Again, we can have a look here. Let's have a look at our documentation, and we have this number insight. You can see here the types of things that allows you to retrieve. You can get a national local format number. We can try and get the caller name if they're in the USA. We can check what network they were on and if they were roaming. There's a lot of different things. What type of number was it they were calling from? Is it a landline? Is it a mobile number? Is it another virtual number? Like, is it a Google Voice, etc.? So there's quite a lot of information we can get for this number insight. So all the call information will come in the webhook event that's in from Nexmo, and then we can look up this number insight and start recording things there. So let's create a new route for that, and we're just going to call it like call event. So again, we're just going to go like app.route. We're just going to create this event endpoint. Now in this instance, it's actually going to come from Nexmo as a post. So we're just going to say that this should always be a post request. And then we're just going to, let's just call it call event. Okay, so the first thing we're going to get is we need to get the actual data itself. So Nexmo is going to send this to us as part of the request as a JSON string. So what we need to do is then take that JSON string and convert it back into a Python object. We're only worried about completed events, so we're going to look at our status. And if our status is completed, then we're going to do something. There's lots of other statuses. There could be statuses such as the call was abandoned, or it was an answer phone, or a whole range of other things, from the call started, the call ringing, etc., etc. In this instance, we're only worried about completed calls because we want to track things like call duration. But if you were building, for example, a support system, then things like, the difference between the time that the phone started ringing and the time that it was answered may become very important. Or if a call was abandoned before it was answered, that could be a very important metric to track as well. So the fact you will get these events triggered for lots of different statuses could be really important for you, depending upon the type of system that you're building and the type of metrics that you need to record. But in this instance, we're only going to worry about completed calls. So again, let's just grab our code from up here, because we're going to need this get campaign, figure out which campaign it is. This time though, it's not going to be number 2, it's going to be part of this event object. It's still going to be called 2, so let's use that. And then you only want to do stuff if we actually know which campaign it is. And let's just set up our different clients. We've got a Mixpanel client. And for our Mixpanel client, we're going to just use our Mixpanel token, which I'm not going to show you. I'm going to load it from the environment. And then let's set up our Nexmo client. So we've already done all our imports and stuff at the start, so this should all just work. And it's going to need our key, which I'm, again, going to just lift from our environment here. And we're going to need our secret. There we go. So we've got both our clients set up. The first thing then we're going to use the Nexmo client for is that insight request. So here's where we find out more information about the user. So this is our Nexmo client, and we're going to do add an advanced number insight. I'm going to tell it which number, which is going to be our from number as part of our event. And that's going to go off, and that's going to do our insight request, which will return, all these kind of things that we talked about before. And we're using the advanced one as well, so we have the possibility of retrieving everything from, the type of number they've called from to the person's name, if they're in the US. So we've done our insight request. Now we're going to set a unique identifier for that user. I'm just going to use their telephone number. So this is, if you remember, if we go back to that diagram, we were talking about like our customer and how do we track them across campaigns and different mediums. We can use their phone number as a UID. So that's what I've done here. I'm just going to use their phone number. I've set it just as a UID, and you'll see me passing that into multiple different things as we go through here. So let's create our user in Mixpanel. So we have this people set, which is part of the Mixpanel API, and it allows you to create a user within their system and pass in some information about that user. What it will actually do, I know it says people set rather than people create, and that's because it does kind of a upsert. It will look to see if the user already exists with this unique identifier. If they do, then it will update their information with what we provide here. Otherwise, if it can't find a user with that identifier, it'll just create a new user with this information. So we can call this each time, and what it'll mean is we always have the most up-to-date information for that person, or it'll create a new user for us. So once we have our user created, we want to start actually tracking the information about them. So let's just copy, because there's a lot of typing this. So we've got, again, this part of the Mixpanel API is this track. We're passing in this user ID, so again, this unique ID for them, which means that this event will be tracked against that user. So if we had multiple different types of events getting tracked, as long as we've supplied the same unique identifier for the user each time, then all those events will be tracked against that user. So here, the event that we're tracking is inbound call. But again, if it was a customer support line, it may be they're phoning different support numbers depending upon the type of support request, or perhaps it's for a hotel, and you've got a different booking line than you do for your concierge service, and you want to track those different events. Or it could be something completely unrelated to telecommunications at all. The event that you could be tracking here is a subscription, or a sale, or a registration, or a whatever other event that you want the user to perform. And as long as you're passing in the same unique identifier for the user each time, then all those events will be tracked against that user. But this time we're going to be tracking inbound call, and the things we're going to be tracking is things like the campaign name, what was the duration of the call in seconds, when did it start, when did it end, and then what was the cost of that call. Mixpanel does have things as well for tracking essentially kind of revenue. So here we're putting the cost in, so we can start looking at it as against our revenue, so we can work out things like what was our cost per acquisition, etc. Just to add that into their actual revenue system, we're going to use this track charge, and we're going to convert it to a negative, because it's actually a cost rather than a profit. And then we have our identifier again, and finally we're just going to track one last thing, and that's how often do they call. So we have a piece of metadata on the user called number of calls that we're going to use this people increment method here to increase by 1 each time they phone. So again, probably for marketing campaigns, you wouldn't see people phoning more than once, but if you're tracking other types of phone systems, that might be more important. And then because it's Flask and we need to return something, at this point, we don't need to return an NCCO or anything like that. This is just our webhook. We're just going to return a string. The important thing about it, though, is that will force Flask to generate a HTTP status code 200, which is kind of what we want. A lot of the Nexmo APIs, if it doesn't receive a 200, if it receives a 404, 500, etc., it's going to assume that you didn't receive the information, and it will replay the information to you. Rather than you missing out on data, we will just keep trying to send you that data until we get that 200 success code. So it's very important that if you have received the data, if you've correctly stored it or did what you want to do with it, send a 200 back. Otherwise, you may get duplicate data as we keep trying that request over and over again. So let's save that up now. Okay, so we've got our server still running. I'm just gonna open a new tab here, and let's just start our ngrok. Okay, so we have our ngrok server is running. We have this URL. Let's just check to make sure it works as well. We should get our not found coming through. Oh, we have an error. So let's just go fix this error first. So line 91, I've indented improperly. Got our campaign, we got our mix, etc. Let's just try taking that whole thing again. Oh, here, we're missing one dot there. I do love Python, but sometimes it can be a little frustrating. Oh, I've just done it for like everything. Here we go. Sorry, you can stop it. That's because we doesn't know where event is coming in at, so we're going to do that. And bingo. Okay, so we've got our numbers that is not recognized. Let's have a look at our to number again, make sure that it's going to look it up correctly for us. So let's grab that. We need to actually put our query string parameter in. Okay, so we can see that we're getting our full call control object back as well. We're doing our stream, etc. So let's actually give this a try. So this should forward to my Android phone. I'm going to try calling it from a different phone. Once you start working in developer advocacy for a telecommunications company, you soon find out the value of having multiple phones. I don't know if you'll be able to hear this, but let's give it a call. Oh, I think that was me. Sorry. Let's just try one more time.
Bundle call.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like the audio is coming through for you guys. We can see it does forward. I mean, hear it ringing now. Hopefully you can hear that. Let me just try one last time to get the audio working for you. Oh, because the audio file. This is actually another really good thing to kind of show. We can see we've got this 404 not found because I forgot to move the audio file across. On ngrok, we have this really cool function which actually lets us look at what events have come through. So we can see here that we had this GET request. There's our parameter that we had. It it returned this NCCO specifying like the file to play, etc. Then we can see the GET request coming in from Nexmo for that file, which I've not copied across, so we're sent at 404. Next one is start sending us different events. So you can see our first event has got the status ringing. Then we've got started. Then we have this 500 error because we've received something we're not really expecting or dealing with at this point. Then we have our status cancelled, that's where I quit. And then again, because we haven't implemented that 404, so we're not going to get that at this time. Just going to set back up, or sorry, not implemented our record function. So just going to get this 404 for it. But let's move some audio file in and have one last go at this. So let's make directory static audio. I know I have in my projects called tracking audio was recorded, and let's move that into our static audio in this one. Okay, so let's give this one last go.
Bundle call. Hi there. Thank you for calling Nexmo. Please stay on the line and we'll connect you in just a moment. Also, please note that calls may be recorded for training and quality control.
Okay, so you can hear that was not my voice. That was a much nicer voice, reading out a message about Nexmo and about the calls being recorded, etc. And then we can see that the call is actually coming through now to my other phone. So this is just being mirrored across onto my screen. So this is going to just cancel that. And you can see all different events that were coming through as that happened. So while we were doing that, as part of those events, remember we've got this like little done that we were sending. We can see that in some of these events here. It's been sent back. It won't be on the ringing. It'll be on wherever our completed is, which we won't have had it completed in this one because I kept hanging up on the per person. But let's have a look at some other data then. So this is actually just some dummy data that I've entered in. So some of the figures and things like that won't be like real data, but just to give you an idea. So this is in Mixpanel. Here we have our Explore tab, which is about people, and you can see the information that we were looking at there. Whether they're roaming, what country they're from, the network type that they're calling about, things like the carrier name, the cost per acquisition. So like you can see the total revenue is actually still negative for this person, so we haven't had any other negative, or we haven't had any other revenue from them at this point. And we can see all the events. So we're only tracking inbound calls in this instance, but you can still see here, we can see the campaign name that they called from. We can see the cost of that call. We can see the duration in seconds, when that call was, etc. And we can do that for like any event. If we look at any of the users in here, we can see, so let's look at ones that have gotten more events. There's somebody who's phoned 20 times. They really like us. And we can have a look at those different calls. So they phoned it 6 times on Wednesday. And you can see again the name of the campaign. They were on the phone for us for just over a minute 20, and the cost. Again, this is all just dummy data. The cost for that length of call would be nowhere near that, so don't worry about it. So we can see lots of different information about the person. We can also start kind of drilling down into this as well. So if you can apply filters to it, so we only want to look at people whose carrier is a particular thing, or we can actually drill into the events, so on their inbound call was performed and when within the last 90 days. When you look at people who've phoned us in the last 90 days or even the last week, or whatever we wanted to do here, or people who, and we can add additional events. So we only have inbound calls here, but say we had things like registrations or purchases or subscriptions or whatever other event that you were tracking in Mixpanel, or whatever business intelligence tool it is that you use, then you'll be able to add additional filters on here and show you and see users that have called you and also subscribed. See if there's any kind of correlation between them. But the really interesting stuff is when you start to come into insights. So in the insights here, Again, it's filtered by events. We really only have the one event, which is our inbound call at the moment. Last 96 hours, we can see we had like kind of 2,000 of them. Let's group it by the campaign name and have a look at that. So here we can see our different campaigns. Apparently a full page advert in the New York Times is, or a Super Bowl commercial or Route 66 billboard are best performing. We can actually start looking at kind of, let's actually put it into a line graph instead. So not as easy to understand at the minute. Let's try a logarithmic for it. No, what we want is cumulative, because that's going to show us, and we can see this graph. Oops, it's always just going up to the right here. And we can see obviously that these three are giving us generating much more interest than things like our per Skywriter, who really, I don't think we're going to be renewing that contract, to be honest. And Zuckerberg just doesn't have the reach he used to have. But no, we're still seeing good traction from our New York Times adverts, etc. And we can start filtering about other things. You know, we can add a filter in here. We can go. We only want to look at people where the duration of the call was greater than 2 minutes. You know, so we can start looking at those now. We can bring that back into our bar graph. You know, so these are people that we engage with for a long time, or we might want to let's take our filter off, and instead let's just look at, we can group it by, or things we can group it again by duration. And we can see here the kind of breakdown of it. So the most popular duration for people to call about from a Super Bowl commercial was between just over a minute and a minute 30. You know, so we can start to get that kind of information about it as well. Now this is only using that one event, that one inbound call event. If you to add other kind of data in with this, you know, about your subscriptions or about signups or about really anything that you wanted, then you can start to see how that becomes very valuable for the business. You know, be able to track things like which campaign was it they came in on, how long did we spend speaking to them, and then what other actions have they performed. You know, we can start to do correlations between those to see, well, people that we engaged with on a longer time, you know, signed up at 20% more regularly than people we didn't, or people who came through on an ad or this particular newsletter or this particular advert or this particular radio broadcast. Well, they actually converted a higher rate, and they were more decisive because they spent longer, or they spent a shorter amount of time on the phone, costing us less money in, you know, for the actual call itself and for our agents having to be there to take the calls. You know, so it can start to provide really quite in-depth and really detailed information about your business, and really help you kind of plan what your future advertising campaigns or strategies would be. That doesn't need to be Mixpanel, obviously. That's just one example I've used here. You can essentially, if the business intelligence tool that you use has an API, then you can send this kind of information to it. If you go back to look at the code, like you can see here, we're just getting this back from the Nexmo API for our insight request. It's just coming back as a Python dictionary. For the webhook, which gave us all the information about the actual call, what was just a JSON string. You know, this data is coming in you know, fairly common formats that you can then send to whatever service you want. I'm using Mixpanel in this example because they have a nice, clean, easy-to-use API, and they're familiar with their service. I've used it in the past. But you could use something like Segment. So if you have a look at their stuff, I know Mixpanel is actually one that they support, but they have a whole host of integrations. You know, so it could be Mixpanel, it could be Amplitude, it could be Kissmetrics, Keen.io, etc., etc., etc. If you run you may have your own CRM that you've developed in-house. Great. If it has an API where you can send some data to, you can use the same system. If you have an older system, maybe it's Excel spreadsheets, not a problem. You know, have your application export a CSV file that you can import into Excel. You know, really, as long as you've got some way of getting data into your business intelligence tools or into your analytics tools, then you can use this same kind of setup, the same way of tracking calls, to load that data into them as well. So I have, just finishing up, there's a few kind of links that I've kind of gone through probably far too fast as we've gone through this talk here. We have our github.com Nexmo organization. That's for all the officially supported kind of client libraries and things for Nexmo. We have our developer.nexmo.com. That's the documentation site you saw me reference a couple of times. It's only just launched this week. It's fantastic. It's been completely redone. It now has fantastic search and is so nicely laid out. Please go have a look at it. The other good thing as well is it is open source, so if you do find any issues, it's also hosted on our Nexmo organization. Please go and file a bug report or raise an issue there and we can address it, or submit a pull request. It's open source. We have our Nexmo community Heroku, our Nexmo community Slack as well, where if you do have any questions I don't get to today, you can hop on our Slack channel, and either myself or one of the other developer advocates should be there. We have our Twitter at just Nexmo. You can also reach me on my own Twitter, which is Bassett. And that's really everything for me. So what I'm going to do now is just pass back over to Glenn to see if we had any questions come through on the chat. Okay, Glenn, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. That was a great demo, very in-depth. And I understand that we're sort of at the top of the hour already, and if people need to jump, we understand. But there are a few questions that are coming in, and I encourage anyone else who might have a question and a few more minutes to spend with us to go ahead and enter those questions now. So, open here. Let me see what questions have come in. So the first one here is, are there restrictions on what the caller number should be when making an outbound call? For example, are you restricted to your virtual number?
Yeah, so whenever you're making the call, the connect there, or making any kind of call where you need to specify a from number, and with the exception of SMS, you're going to need to use one of our virtual numbers. SMS varies as well depending upon the territory. There's different restrictions in different places as to who you can say is an SMS. The UK, actually, where I'm based, is probably the least restrictive of them all. You can use alpha senders and things where you're actually using text instead of a number, etc. There's no real restriction on even the from number that you say you're sending it from. But I know for the telephone numbers, at least for kind of our connect, etc., you're going to need to put in an actual Nexmo virtual number.
Great, thanks, Aaron. The next question is about Mixpanel, and it's just saying, what is Mixpanel for those who haven't seen that tool before?
Okay, so Mixpanel is kind of like an analytics or business intelligence tool. It's similar to Google Analytics, except where Google before was all about just tracking kind of page views and was very web-centric. Mixpanel is more about tracking events. So it doesn't prescribe any events to you. It just gives you tools for segmenting them, or for kind of analyzing them, or for comparing them to each other. You actually specify what the events are, and you specify what data should be sent with that event. So you saw there that I created an inbound call event, and then I sent a bunch of meta information along with that. But really, you can create any event that you like. So it could be obviously inbound call. You maybe want to be tracking your outbound call campaigns as well, so you can create another outbound event. You may want user registrations to be an event, or newsletter signups to be an event, or you could tie it into a point of sale device and track your sales through that as an event. Really, it's quite flexible, and it allows you to define what events are important to you, important to your business, that you want to report upon.
Great, thanks, Aaron. The next one here is, what is the cost for advanced call insight?
Oh, good. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head the actual individual cost for it, mostly because our different APIs vary depending upon territories, etc. What I would recommend, though, is if I just get back to my browser here, on the Nexmo site, under kind of like all our products and things, we have this pricing tab here, and you can very quickly kind of look to see what the different costs are, etc. You've been pricing kind of euros or dollars, so I think this may not be one of the ones that's dependent upon region actually. Yeah, so for an advanced one, you're looking at that'd be what, 3 cents for any phone number.
Great. The next question here says, can you discuss registering the services we would create, endpoint authorization, the context options such as phone, user, company, etc.? So I think the question is, you know, we've created a service and then the process for registering it.
Oh, right, yes, sorry, yes. We actually just launched a new voice application dashboard. So whenever you join Nexmo and you purchase a number, so I've got several numbers that I've registered against my account, you can then create applications and link those numbers to those applications like I've done here. So this is actually the inbound call tracking application that you saw me demoing today. So this is the numbers that are linked to that. So this is actually the one I was calling that you heard me phone, and these are the endpoints that it was hitting. So whenever you want to create a new voice application, it's actually on the Nexmo site under voice, and create an application. You then fill in kind of the application name, the event URL, which is where we're going to be sending those webhooks. You can choose if you want it to be via get or post. I'd always recommend post for that. The answer URL, which is where we're going to fetch that NCCO from. Which again was just that same URL that we're looking at today. And you can see in this instance that's actually going to be a GET request. And then once you've got that all saved, you then can link it to a number. So I would link to 2 numbers actually, because I was wanted to try it like for multiple different campaigns. And whenever you phone one of these numbers, because it's linked to that application, it's going to use those settings. It's going to use that URL for the post and that URL to get the NCCO. Oh, one thing I should mention as well, as having kind of this dashboard, is on our developer site under our SDKs and tools, we also have this Nexmo CLI, this command line interface, and it really has great coverage for kind of everything you can do via Nexmo, including all the administration APIs as well. So I think under usage here we should have it. Yeah, so we've got applications there, so you can see you can list all the applications that you have. You can create a new application, you know, by providing it with the answer URL and the event URL, and it'll actually go through and create the application for you. It'll generate your public and private keys and save the public key with the application and save your private key locally. So you can actually you can do that all from the command line. I think you can even purchase the numbers as well via the command line. So you know, we have kind of our numbers here. You can see we're listing out numbers that you have. You can search for numbers based on country, and then you can buy a number. So if you were, say, provisioning a new campaign or a new application, and you're using your usual provisioning tools, whether it be like Chef or Puppet or Ansible or Salt, etc., then you actually could script the whole thing to purchase a new number, to set up an application, and to register that number with the application.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. And it looks as though those are all the questions we had for now. Thank you again, everyone, for sticking with us for the full Q&A along with Aaron's live coding session. We will provide more information in a follow-up email that'll have some of these resources that Aaron pointed you to and everything that you would need to actually start building a call tracking app and any other kind of app that will leverage Nexmo. But thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.